Good afternoon. Today we are unveiling our principles for reopening in-person instruction at our colleges and universities this fall. Before I address that, though, I wanted to give you a quick update about some news out of the East Coast. We've been informed that Washington State was erroneously included in a list of states where New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut would require travelers to quarantine. And so we've been told to expect that to be corrected shortly. With that said, let's turn to our colleges and universities. So we know that depending on the spread of the virus in the next few months, we believe today's proclamation is going to allow our institutions to put in place protocols and tools that are necessary to allow safe in-person instruction. We're very happy about that. No matter what happens to the spread of the virus, we know that students and faculty and staff should know that their return to campus won't be in the usual situation. We know that changes are afoot, and we want to talk about those today. Today I'm joined by University of Washington President Mari Cauce, Whatcom County Community College President Kathi Hiyane-Brown, and Pacific Lutheran University President Allan Belton. They're going to deliver some remarks shortly, and I appreciate them being here. Today's proclamation we're issuing provides specific health guidance for our four-year universities and colleges, public and private, as well as our two-year community and technical colleges, and also our apprenticeship programs and our private career schools. So everyone will have this protection in the university or the state of Washington. We know each campus of these institutions are different. They vary in size and programs and location, of course. But whether you're a Husky or a Cougar or a Viking or a Gooey Duck or a Lancelot or a Bulldog or a Viking or a Blue or a Fighting Cardinal or a Choker, we want to make sure you're protected while you get an education. And so we want you back there, but we want you in a place and in a manner that will keep you safe and the people around you safe. Our Higher Education Committee brought public and private institutions together in this process to help design this proclamation. And it had good business leaders' support from Challenge Seattle, from the Washington Roundtable, and helped us prepare these specifications that we'll talk about today. Washington Student Achievement Council Executive Director Mike Miotti also deserves a big thank you. He's been working really hard on this. So this plan includes flexibility for a variety of conditions as they change regarding the pandemic, and it provides measures to protect students also with underlying health conditions, and it acknowledges the needs for equitable students or equitable treatment for students for a variety of different circumstances. This health guidance has a lot of things that will be familiar to us. Guidance regarding face coverings, physical distancing, limits on class sizes and gatherings, symptom monitoring, personal protective equipment, in coordination with their local health districts in areas where the disease is most active. The institutions are also required to meet all state and local health standards. There are a variety of standards, including labor and industry standards, that apply to the employees of these institutions that will also protect them, that are already on the books. So we know under this makes sense. Students and personnel will be required to stay home and seek medical guidance if they believe they are suffering symptoms consistent with COVID-19. And the students and personnel will need to self-quarantine and isolate if they're confirmed with COVID-19. This is a safe thing for all of us, not just students, obviously. These institutions must develop and implement protocols that are specific for their institutions. And that includes considerations such as limiting shared equipment, tracking and tracing the spread of the virus on their campus and in their communities. So I want to list some of the things that they're going to need to think about and have key functions that are planned on how they're going to go about that. We need appropriate capacity limits on food service and restricting cash payments. They'll need to consider floor markings on transportation facilities for social distancing. They'll need to look for the possibility of using staggered schedules for shared areas in campus restroom facilities like bathrooms. They'll need to consider limiting the number of visitors to campus, and of course consider health measures to protect employees. And we do need them to consider a self-certification process when students and personnel come back to school. They're going to need to certify they do not have these symptoms, and that's an important thing to think about. Now, we understand not every campus is the same, so these plans are going to be specific to each campus to have their safe back-to-school plan. These institutions have already been working with their local health districts using their expertise as well, which we appreciate. So with that, I'd like to turn over for comments to the President of the University of Washington. And Mari, could you take it away?
Thank you very much, Governor Inslee. I think we all agree that we have some of the very best colleges and universities in the world right here in our great state of Washington. And we've been working together closely, and that includes the 2 years, the 4 years, publics and privates, on how we can safely bring students and employees back to our campus in the fall for face-to-face instruction. Partnership has been key. We speak for 50 higher education institutions across Washington that are educating more than 550,000 students. Our work group has included 8 presidents, and we've sought outside experts to make sure that we are following global best practices. We've looked at best practices around the country and around the world. We've partnered with Challenge Seattle and with the Washington Roundtable to engage the Boston Consulting Group, and we're very grateful for their help and guidance in shaping our planning. Our plans are based on the very, very best science and public health guidance, and we've relied on multiple sources for best practices on food, transportation, housing. We have, left nothing unturned. At the University of Washington, for example, and I think it's important to point out that although we are talking about bringing students back for at least limited face-to-face instruction, that it's not like all our students left. We have had over 2,000 students on our campus from March all the way now through the height of the pandemic, and we've learned quite a bit from that. So at the University of Washington, we're doing things like reducing density in our lounges. We're removing furniture and positioning the remaining pieces in small groupings of 3 to 5, so that, all the big chairs that, that used to be there for, big groupings, now they're small groupings that are well distanced. Many of our UW dining facilities are going to have greatly reduced seating with heavy emphasis on meals that can be plated and taken away. We have a lot of, take and go food. Students are going to be able to pre-order food on an app and have it ready to take when they go arrival. They can take it, in those glorious days of September outside and eat outdoors, or they can take it to their dorms on those days that are a little gloomier. Every one of our institutions is unique, and each of our plans for returning to campus are going to vary based on the need of our own institution. But we'll all be basing our decisions on the same principles. We commit to faculty, staff, and students and their families that safety will come first. We recognize that in-person learning matters a lot to students who choose our colleges to pursue their education, and we understand that, and that is part of why we are bringing them back. We're all eager to safely get back to in-person and hands-on instruction, and this plan is our pathway of doing so. And I just want to add that we have looked at every single decision through an equity lens, because that is important to all of us.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing from the dogs. President Brown.
Hiyane-Brown, and I'm the president of Whatcom Community College in Bellingham. And I'm here representing the Washington Association of Community and Technical Colleges. Together, our 34 colleges serve about 363,000 students of all ages and backgrounds in local communities and across the country and internationally across the state. Governor Inslee, first, I'd like to begin by thanking you for your leadership in creating a path for all of our college students while keeping all Washingtonians safe and healthy. Today, the need for education and training is critical. We know that thousands of laid-off workers will need retraining in order to become more competitive in our new economy. And likewise, employers will need a skilled workforce to rebuild and thrive. From the beginning, you considered higher education as a key player in our state's economic recovery efforts and allowed us to continue to serve students within public health guidelines. We quickly moved our instruction and services to students online. All of our colleges were able to also set up emergency funds with the help from CARES Act funding and from our colleges' foundations to support students who faced significant economic hardships. Students in certain essential programs have been allowed to come to campus in small numbers, depending on the various college protocols, to access labs and equipment with very strict safety protocols in mind. For example, here in Whatcom, instruction for students in our nursing and allied health programs will be limited to campus skills testing and lab activities that must be conducted in person. These programs were required to prioritize skills and limit on-campus time to a minimum. So when students are on campus, all safety protocols adhering to federal, state, and local public health guidelines will be met. We are fully engaged and committed to the health and safety guidelines released today in a resolution. And in fact, presidents from all 34 of our colleges meet several times a week to discuss the safety and welfare of our campus communities and to share best practices. We have also designed our programs and services in a way that allow us to pivot quickly if the COVID situation worsens. A special thanks to our students, faculty, and staff of all of our colleges for their persistence and resilience during these challenging times. Together with our university partners, community and technical colleges are here to help students learn, stay safe, and build a better future for themselves and the state of Washington. Thank you very much.
Dr. Brown, thank you for doing, turning out nurses who are so heroes right now. We appreciate that. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned your mascot, the orca whales, so say hello to the orca whales for me up there. We now have President Belton of PLU. President Belton.
Thank you, Governor Inslee, and thanks so much for mentioning land salute in your opening as well. It's clear in working with you and with your team that you fully understand that the reopening of institutions of higher learning are going to play a critical role in our state's recovery. In terms of our institutions being a key economic driver in the state, providing Washington employers with highly trained talent that they need, particularly in the fields like nursing that are critical to our state's recovery, and by being an engine for equity and economic mobility for all of our citizens. And while we're all eager to return to our campuses and classrooms, I'm sure I can speak for my fellow college presidents across the state when I assure you that the well-being and safety of our students, faculty, and staff will absolutely not be compromised. Now, perhaps more than ever, it is critical that institutions ensure equitable access and outcomes, and that we do everything we can to mitigate any disproportionate impacts this pandemic may have on student populations, particularly those for whom the economic stress of COVID might make them vulnerable and not be able to return to their education. Throughout this spring and early summer, colleges and universities across the state have worked diligently to cover financial aid and housing cost gaps. The 10 institutions that make up the independent colleges of Washington alone have raised upwards of $7 million to provide emergency student aid beyond that made available through the CARES Act. Washington's colleges and universities have also worked to provide robust online academic support, distribute computers, Wi-Fi hotspots, and other distance learning tools, and provide telehealth and virtual counseling services to our students. While each campus is unique, we remain united in our effort to support the needs of students throughout the remainder of the recovery from this pandemic. In closing, I'd also like to add that at every institution of higher education in Washington, we worked hard to make strides in how we address systemic inequities on our campuses. We've made good progress, but the events of the past few weeks have only highlighted the need and strengthened our resolve to create a more inclusive and actively anti-racist learning and working environment. At PLU, we understand full well, as do our peer institutions across the state, that writing our return to work protocols and planning for pandemic-related contingencies must not interfere with the progress of this vitally important work. So thank you, Governor Inslee, my apologies, and thanks for your continued support of higher ed in Washington.
Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing. You know, it's a joy to meet your alumni around the state doing great work. I was texting with a PLU alumni from PLU. In fact, a fellow who I think he still holds the percentage field goal record for PLU, Randy Leland, from the early 70s. And it's fun to see your graduates doing great work. Well, listen, with that, I'd love to stand for questions to myself or any of our speakers. Fire away. Fire away. We're getting to you in just a second here. Don't give up on us.
First, we'll go to Rachel from AP.
Hi, Governor. At the start, I know you mentioned that our inclusion in the Northeast states quarantine plan for visitors was a mistake. But given that there has been a spike in cases in several states, are you considering a similar visitor quarantine requirement here?
We have not seriously considered that. We haven't eliminated that for all time, but at the moment, it is not under a serious consideration.
And did you have a follow-up, Rachel?
Yes, just as it pertains to the guidance that was kind of issued today with the colleges, I did see that the proclamation notes that counties in phase 1 or modified phase 1 may need to implement additional precautions. Can you give any examples of what those additional requirements might entail?
We didn't specifically articulate those, but we thought that those counties that still have these really high rates, it made sense for the local health district to have an opportunity to review the individual campus's plan for what they think might be necessary under those particular conditions. We just thought that added layer of protection, that one more set of eyeballs on the plan made sense. And there might be a whole variety of things depending on what the conditions are in those campuses.
All right, next we will go to Joe Sullivan with the Seattle Times. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, a question for the governor and then one for the administrators. Governor, curious to get your reaction to Lewis County Sheriff Rob Snaza's remark last night telling residents down there, don't be sheep, regarding your new statewide mask mandate. And then for the school administrators, I'm curious to get a sense of how you're going to assure safety in the residence halls and the fraternities and sororities. If you're going to limit number of people limiting those facilities, and what will you do if you find big parties are going on campus?
Well, look, I'm disappointed. I think that people who are law-abiding, those who are wearing their seatbelts because it's law and it's safe, those who are wearing face masks because it is both the law and is safe, I just don't agree calling those folks somehow barnyard animals. They're protecting other people. I think the folks who are doing that have at least 3 virtues. Number one, they're demonstrating that they care about other people. Look, when you wear a facial mask, it's a cloth mask. What you're showing is you want to protect everybody else around you. It might be your grandparent. It might be another student. It might be the grocery worker where you're buying groceries. But it shows you have the virtue of caring about other people. I don't think that's a virtue. I think it's a vice. It also shows that you are following good medical and healthcare and science. because it's compelling evidence that these face masks do reduce the possibility of a virus. I think following science and healthcare is a virtue, not a vice. And last, I think following the laws is a virtue, not a vice. And I think we have to be disappointed in any law enforcement officer who would encourage illegal behavior. Fortunately, I don't think it's going to have a big impact because Washingtonians have demonstrated huge compliance with our orders so far. We're already seeing increasing face mask usage even before our proclamation. It's almost doubled in Yakima County in the last couple of weeks. So we think we're going to be successful on this, and I hope so, because this is all about saving people's lives, and I think that's a noble purpose.
Attempt to answer the question for our campus, and we've talked enough that I know that there's some similarities. First of all, we are looking very closely at density across all our housing units. For example, our fraternities and sororities will be at 50% capacity, and depending on what kinds of dormitories, we have some doubles, we're also reducing density. But I think that one thing that's going to be really important is from day one, how do we create a culture where we all recognize that our lives are all intertwined and that we're all responsible for our own and for other people's safety. We are going to be doing education from day one. Right now, one of our faculty members is doing a study to see what is it that motivates students, people in that age group that sometimes get defined as low risk, but in fact, that age group, they're almost just as likely to get COVID, and the complications, they may not die from it, but there's serious complications there. And of course, it's what are they going to take home to their grandparents, others, et cetera. But how do we build that culture? We've been talking about, maybe having an honor code that students take from day one. We've been talking about, how do we empower our students to, when someone else is kind of out of line, feeling comfortable, it's kind of the old see something, say something. We've been developing some of that culture, quite frankly, around the Me Too movement and around sexual harassment, where if you see something, you get involved. How do we use that same culture building from the very beginning so that we build a culture where if someone does start getting out of line, it doesn't have to be me coming in, but rather that the peer group will come in and say, hey, that's not okay. That isn't the way that we do things at the University of Washington.
President Belton, you had something to add?
I think President Cauce points out something very important, that each campus is unique, and I think Governor Inslee, you mentioned that as well earlier. We are all taking our own measures based on the type of campus and the type of residences we have. Just as an example, we're maximizing the number of singles and doubles on our campus, and I think most of the university presidents I've spoken to are setting aside rooms for isolation and or quarantine. We as a campus, PLU has eliminated a rule that we generally have that requires students that live more than 25 miles away to live on campus. We're eliminating that for a year. And then to the party issue, we're a Lutheran school, so there are no parties on our campus.
Could I add some comments because they've inspired a thought, but both to your question to the presidents and the question about the sheriff. This is about demonstrating our respect and care for the other people around us. And I think that people who wear masks are not fearful or timid. They are caring and courageous. And when people on a campus remind their fellow students that, hey, masking up kind of makes sense, that shows you're caring and courageous. When people suggest that we should all follow the law, that's caring and courageous. And I think that sentiment is going to prevail in the state of Washington.
Joe, would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So next we will go to Jerry Cornfield with the Everett Herald. Go ahead, Jay.
There we go. wanted to ask first, Governor, about the testing. Yesterday, you mentioned the infection rate was reaching a danger zone on both sides of the Cascades, and numbers are surging. What can you tell us today? What have you learned today about the situation in Washington? And have you seen any evidence yet that the large-scale demonstrations and rallies around the state are having an impact on those numbers?
I don't have any information that was different than yesterday. I typically get the EPI report, the epidemiological report, late in the afternoon. I haven't seen it yet. I don't think so far we've been advised that there's evidence that of increasing activity associated with those particular events. So I haven't been advised that there's evidence of that at the moment.
Would you like to ask a follow-up there, Jay?
Sure. The other issue I want to follow up with is on the special session you mentioned last week. One of the conversations that you were trying to do was a lack of consensus among lawmakers, and I think yourself on how it might proceed. I wondered if you're looking for consensus on non-budget issues in particular. Are you seeking consensus on a policing reform agenda for the special session?
That has not been really on the discussion, in part because we're all looking at options. As you know, I've formed a task force to look at these issues to advise us. So that has not really been a part of the discussion. It's just that we need some meaningful plan that will be fair to people in the state of Washington, that can pass both chambers and obtain a governor's signature, and that just hasn't developed at the moment. But those discussions are continuing as recently as the day before yesterday.
Okay. Up next, we'll go to Keith Eldridge with Como. Go ahead, Keith.
Hi, Governor. I had a chance to talk to Sheriff Snaza in Lewis County a second ago, and he said he didn't mean to say that people should defy your order. He just meant don't be a follower. Question, so we did clarify that. But how are you going to enforce this when it takes effect on Friday? Are you going to have law enforcement try to do that for you? And as you said yesterday, it'd be a gentle reminder. I mean, how are you going to enforce it?
Well, that's helpful if the sheriff clarified his intentions. If that was not his intention, that I think it's very helpful that he's indicated that, and I certainly appreciate that. Look, what motivates people to wear a face mask is principally you don't want to hurt somebody else. You don't want to kill somebody else. You don't want to give people unknowingly a virus. That's what really motivates people to do this. And as increasing numbers of people realize we can unknowingly infect a grocery store clerk I'm talking to or my grandparent that I'm visiting, as people come to understand that, that's what motivates people to wear a mask, that they don't want to hurt somebody else. This is its main effectiveness is to raise people's consciousness about that, to give them confidence that sometimes there's some peer pressure that works, and to give people license to do this. Now, this is a misdemeanor if people do not abide by this law. It is the law of the state of Washington. But we believe that there will be huge voluntary compliance with this, and that law enforcement activity will not be necessary. We hope that that's the case. We're looking for compliance, not citations. Now, our experience to date in Washington has given us confidence about that, because 99.5% of the time, that was what we did, the success we had when we had the stay home, stay healthy order. So it worked. There's every reason to believe it will continue to work in this regard. And again, I think the reason for this is that this is not an expression of machismo, like you want to show your machismo by not wearing a mask, because it's not principally to protect you. It's fine in some sense to say you don't care about your health. You'd rather, just run the risk. In some sense, I suppose that's okay. But this is about not imposing a risk on other people around you without them knowing it and without you knowing about it. Because even though you have no symptoms, you can transmit this disease. So I think that as time goes on, as as more people wear these masks, this will become something that's just kind of a normal activity. It's different now, but it's like a lot of things in life. I'm telling you, I grew up not wearing seatbelts, and that changed. And I think that I hope that we will have a same experience here, and I believe that we will.
Keith, would you like to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, can I just add one comment? Because I think one thing that at times we've been hearing is that, I think that young people are very aware that I can take this home to my grandmother, and I can, but part of the message that we really need to get out, but they feel that, hey, I'm not, if I give it to a peer, someone else that's in their 20s, it's no big deal. And quite frankly, I've heard some people in positions of authority pretty much say that. And one of the messages that's really important to give out to young people is, first of all, someone, your friend who might be 22 and may look hale and hearty might be immune compromised. You don't know what else they're carrying with them. But even if they're not, what we know is that young people are much less likely to die, but we're still learning about the complications that someone can get at 25 that may end up affecting their lungs for the rest of their lives. And so it's not just about your grandmother, it's about your other peers. So I just want to absolutely underscore what Governor Inslee said, but that, and we want to make sure that our students understand that even with each other, no matter how healthy they look, that this is about protecting other people. And you need to be, that just what you can see is not always what's there.
This is why this is a nasty little virus. It sneaks up on us. We can be transmitters and we just don't understand it. That's why this masking requirement needs to be the law and is the law of the state of Washington. When you do ask about enforcement of this, this is an iterative process. We learn as we go and we adapt. If this virus will continue to grow, and if not enough people do wear masks, then there could be more appropriate law enforcement activity. Or potentially counties could have to either not advance to the next phase or maybe even go backwards. We're just not out of the woods on this yet. And that's why I think we need to be vigilant, aggressive, and responsible. And I think this masking order does all three of those things.
Okay, Keith, would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, I'll cede my time to others.
Thanks. All right. So next we'll go to Jim Camden with the Spokesman Review. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks. I am wondering, with limitations on visitors and also large gatherings, what does this mean for athletic events and some other traditional events on college campuses like Mom's Weekend or Dad's Weekend, things like that?
Do the presidents want to answer that? How about the loot?
To give it
Go ahead, Amari.
To give it a try, and and the answer is it's probably going to be, first of all, depending on where we're at in terms of the pandemic, whether we're in phase 4 or phase 3, whether things are going up or going down. But certainly, we have been, for example, in terms of athletics, we've been working very closely with the other Pac-12 schools. They have, fabulous people that are advising them, including many of our own faculty in epidemiology. Again, the idea is it's got to be safety first. I don't think, who knows, between now and August, hope can spring eternal. But I'm not particularly planning that our August opener is going to be with a full Husky Stadium. I think the chances of that are very small. It is possible that if there is, we've looked at a range of things from perhaps, just playing within the conference to, perhaps playing with no spectators, to perhaps not playing. I mean, the whole range of options are there. But the important thing is it's going to be safety first. Mom and Dad's Weekend. Right now, for example, we have a gala at the end of the year that, usually, it's about, celebrating our accomplishments, fundraising, et cetera. It's going to be virtual. and we still haven't planned it all out. Our graduation, our commencement ceremonies were different than anything that we'd ever done before. One of the things that's, that's been fun, and the amount that's been fun has been about that big, but has been that it's really taken, all the creativity in people has come out, in all kinds of ways, and we're finding all kinds of new and interesting ways in which to build community. Community is critical, and we will be building community on campus, but we'll be doing it in a very different way.
Time for a few more questions.
Yeah, Jim, did you have a follow-up?
It's a technical thing. Will the colleges be enforcing wearing of masks in the dorms when the students are out of their rooms?
I'll have presidents answer that question.
Sure, I can take a stab at that from a PLU perspective, and I know that most of our peer institutions are treating this the same way. So we've all developed pretty comprehensive plans, and we've actually worked together across platforms, so the publics, the privates, the community and technical colleges, to think about our responses depending on what phase we're in. Now, I know that this current proclamation really kind of disconnects the university's return from phases overall, although the governor pointed out phase 1 and 1.5 have some different restrictions on them. We all have plans for what happens when students are in the classroom, when students are in their dorm rooms, when they're in common spaces, when they're in dining halls, when they're outside. And so generically, we are going to require masks for our students on campus in the classroom and even outside if they cannot physically distance. So as a general rule, if a student cannot physically distance, if an employee or a faculty member cannot physically distance, mask will be required.
But this isn't just about students. This is also about employees and faculty. If you're working in your office alone, you don't need to wear a mask. But if there's someone else there, there's an expectation that it's a mask. We've been talking about, but we don't have finals. There might be cases where, there might be a pod of 2 that within that pod of 2, just like within a family setting. But certainly when you're talking about outside of the room and with other people, it is the expectation that unless things change and we get to a different stage, that we'll be wearing masks and they'll have a big W on it and we're going to look great in them.
And the same here for all the 2-year colleges. We'll be practicing those social and physical protocols. And so here again, I echo that will be the practice, like many of our partner institutions.
A few more questions?
Yes, we've got time for 2 more. Up next, we'll go to Hannah Scott with Cairo Radio. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hi, Governor. I have just a couple of quick ones today. One, a follow-up from yesterday. I know you spoke about the face mask requirement statewide, that people with medical conditions would be exempt. I got a lot of questions today from people wanting to know, will they need a medical note, like in a vaccine situation? Or what about people with claustrophobia, anxiety, things like that? And I'm also hearing about large gatherings, specifically in Snohomish County, of more than 50 people, where there was a person who was infected and now everyone is being contact traced there. Wondering if you can speak to just our state on people gathering and not being at that point yet where we should do that.
Well, as far as folks who have medical conditions, there's no requirement in the order that you have a certification from a physician. It's largely a self-decision in this regard, and we largely will defer to people's decisions about that. And we trust people, and by the way, this is about trusting Washingtonians. We're trusting Washingtonians to do the right thing here, and we believe we're going to get a lot of compliance. As far as large gatherings, look, there are still rules in effect, and we expect people to follow them. And large gatherings are a real problem. And that does include even when you're outside, because when people are packed together, you can still have transmission outside. And that's why these rules are in place. So the specific rule as to the size of the gathering, you got to check with your local county to see what phase it's in, but those need to be followed because that's a significant issue. And if you've looked at the super spreader events, there's kind of a phenomenon called super spreader. We have somebody who's really good at getting a viral load out there, And they've affected dozens of people at some of these events, sometimes family events. You've read over a dozen people get infected. So this is a real thing, and when this happens, like in Snohomish County, it puts a real burden on us because we have to go contact trace everybody in that crowd. And that's, you know, that takes a lot of personal power. Now, thankfully, we've had the foresight to train about 1,000 people to do that work. So we got those people ready. But don't put that on other people that have to do that work. Just be sensible. We understand being young too. This is one place where the young can be leaders on this. The young understand parties, but don't go infect your grandparents. That's a request we're making to people under the age of 30.
Hannah, did you have a follow-up?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, so for our last question, we'll head to Alexis Kroll with the Tacoma News Tribune. Go ahead, Alexis.
With the CARES Act funding, some schools have said that shifting guidance from the Department of Education delayed the process of getting that funding to students. I'm wondering if these experienced that, and also if they can speak more about what kind of emergency relief is available to students going into the fall.
I'm happy to take that, Governor, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, in fact, the instructions they were confusing and they did tend to change over time. And so a lot of our institutions, quite frankly, struggled with those allocations of dollars. We have kind of worked our way through that, and I think most of our institutions have been able to utilize those funds to issue emergency relief directly to students. I know that I mentioned in my statement earlier that institutions are also raising funds separately, primarily for undocumented students, because the directions that we got do not allow us to use the CARES Act funds for undocumented or international students. So just using PLU as an example, we've been able to help well over 300 students in just the first couple months of the coronavirus outbreak, and we will continue that through the summer and into the fall.
Yeah. Just to follow up, I mean, I wish it would have gotten there sooner. I wish, you know, it would have been less paperwork, all of that, but it did get there. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but I think more than 9,000 of our students, we have a very large student population, got checks of $1,000 or more. We did absolutely, any student that was undocumented but met the same requirements as the other students, we also made sure that they got the equivalent amount. And, you know, we had an emergency fund before, and we have been actively fundraising to make it bigger. The kinds of difficulties that our low-income students, our students of color have had are really, you know, pretty tremendous. We've also done things like made sure that we, you know, that we had laptops. We, you know, handed out thousands of laptops so students could be working at home, hotspots. Some of the emergency funds went to internet. So the CARES, I want to be very clear that we so appreciate the money that we got from the CARES Act, but we've also had to put other resources in there as well.
And all of our colleges, two-year colleges, were also heavily involved in making some CARES Act funding available to students as well as private donations. Students were asking for housing and rent relief. I think that was by far the most significant ask. But they were also looking for tuition assistance as they were trying to complete their quarter, their spring quarter. And we also gave out assistance for books as well as laptops. And here again, laptops were a needed piece of technology by all of our students, having gone remotely for instruction. And of course, in the rural areas, a lot of students were very concerned about their ability to access internet. And so we created hotspots around the campuses throughout the state. So definitely we anticipate that all of the colleges will have available some money for the summer as well as the fall, and we'll just try to make the application process easy so students and all students can access these dollars.
Alexis, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I'm wondering what large lecture classes might look like in the fall.
We're still working out those details, and we are still, remember, we're a quarter system, so we don't start until late September. But I think that, we'll be seeing online work in terms of the lecture part of the class. And then there will be other opportunities for students to get together, perhaps in study groups. Perhaps they might come in, the big lecture might be there, but then they might be able to do a lab section. It really varies because our big lectures are, tremendously variable. But I'll point out, for example, our Biology 180 class, which is I think it's one of our, I don't want to say the single, but one of our top, 3 or 4 largest classes already, even before the pandemic, functioned as a flip the classroom, where students actually watched the lectures at home and they could replay, or in their dorms, and they could or in groups, and they would replay those sections that, they didn't understand as well, etc. And then they would do discussion sections. So it probably is going to vary class by class, but students will be doing it largely online for our large classes.
All right, any final words, Governor?
I was just a thought as I was listening to these presidents. One of the things that ought to give us increasing confidence facing this big challenge, and it is a big challenge as the data reveals, we've got big challenges with COVID-19. There are increasing infection rates in many parts of our state. But I think there's reason to be confident. That is, we're working together on this, and I think that ought to be heartening. Washington State University is doing good work, not just the UW. So the Huskies and Cougars are working on this problem. Republicans and Democrats. I've talked to Republican mayors and county commissioners in Eastern Washington who are working to encourage their folks to wear masks, as are some Democrats in various places. Nurses and doctors are working together who've been heroes. I just think in difficult times, the thing that works best is to work together. And I think we're seeing that happening, and that ought to be encouraging to us. So let's keep up this work and wash your hands, mask up. Thank you.